I'm Dane Rose, founder and owner of Mystical Landscapes, Inc. for the past 27 years. This video is intended to save you time. For much of my career, I would come out and personally meet each new client and go over what I'm going to go over today, but this gives you the option of watching it in the evening after dark at a time that's convenient, interrupting, and I always like avoiding fixed appointment schedules so that I can go with the flow a little bit more. And so this video is for those of you who want to know what's going on, want to understand the process, and would enjoy skipping an unnecessary meeting. Now, it's my job to think about every little detail and a lot about process design, because every one of the steps that I'm going to go over with you have been gone over thousands of times and affected thousands of people. And as a result, I pay a lot of attention to these details. Now, if you're among a large percentage of people who have had a bad experience with contractors, you're probably going to appreciate these nuances as well. So what I'll do is I'm going to walk you through the design and installation process of working together, and then I'll pause at each point to explain why I do it in that way, because it's always carefully thought out in the interest of the vast majority of clients. So the first thing that I'm going to do is give you a landscape questionnaire. Now, you may have beat me to it if you've come across either of my two books on Amazon or local bookstores, and the questionnaire is in these two books. Now, the best protocol is to fill that questionnaire out fully. And if you're doing this with a partner, let them review your answers and differentiate themselves. It's uncommon for two members of a couple to have the exact same idea and the exact same budget and values for a project. So that's normal. And you can fill out two entirely different questionnaires. So why do I do this? Well, when I got started, I was in the middle of a build, building out a design, and the client walked out in the middle of the job and said, I've just thought about something. Where am I going to park my 40-foot boat? I said, where indeed? Now, there's no place. The driveway that we've designed for you and poured in concrete doesn't have any place for a 40-foot boat. This is the first time you've mentioned a 40-foot boat. A little bit later, someone came out in the middle of a project and asked, what about my hot tub? Where's a good place for a hot tub? And I said, well, a good place would have been over here, but we've just blocked the place where you would run the electricity with the wall we just built. It would have been really easy to run electrical conduit there, but this is the first time you mentioned a hot tub. Another design scenario, I'm looking over another designer's very beautifully laid out design. And I look at the design. I'm an installer. I've been bidding this for some time, and so I see around $80,000 of work there. And I asked the client how much they wanted to spend to install their landscape, and they said $30,000. And I said, I'm the medium to low bidder, meaning when clients go out and get multiple bids, I'm never the high bidder. And so if the cheapest I could do this concept for is $80,000, it means you're not going to be able to get any other bids. I mean, you can try, by all means, but this whole design has to be torn up and built from scratch, because if you just delete 2/3 of it and you have half a swimming pool, or it just doesn't make any sense. So you've wasted all of that money on a design. You've got your hopes up because the design wasn't built to your budget. Now, these are 3 examples of many of what happens when you begin a design process without thinking carefully about all of the different factors in the design, because landscapes are multidimensional art. You have lighting, night lighting and day lighting and shade. That's one dimension. You have drainage. That's another dimension. You have utilities, a future gas stove out in an area that would be really easy to run pipe in an open trench if you think ahead. But if you don't think ahead, now you've got to tear up the landscape you've just installed to run a gas line. And so these are complex living art forms. And no one with, the typical sophistication of, even someone who's done it before, no one's going to remember all of these things. Now, another thing that kind of came up was, I would often get in the middle of couples discussing budget for the first time, because I could go over all these questionnaire questions and charge you $175 an hour to do that in person. But when couples debate items like how much are we going to spend live in person, sometimes they'll spend 20 minutes and there's no resolution. Well, then the design grinds to a halt. So it's in your interest to think about all these things ahead of time and save money so you don't have to pay me to mediate or sort these things out. And so it's all about making sure that something does not have to be redone at your expense and quite expensively. Because when you make a mistake, you have a change order, you have the chaos of interruption, and it usually involves doing it less efficiently and sometimes less optimally as well. That you don't want to tear up the whole driveway, so you end up adding a little bit here that if you thought about it in advance, you would have done more attractively and more cost effectively. So the questionnaire is a really big deal. And there are 27 years of questions on there, meaning anytime I or a client has ever gotten surprised because something didn't get discussed, that gets added to the questionnaire. So it's never been a better questionnaire, and it's all about saving you mistakes, saving you money. And there's one other piece that if you haven't done design, you may not be familiar with. 90% of my design ideas get built on time and on budget because I build them on time and on budget. That is unprecedented. Meaning I'm sure there's someone out there doing it somewhere, but I don't see that happening. What tends to happen, for example, one of my recent clients paid a terrific landscape architect $12,000 to come up with a plan that never got built because it was twice the budget as the client wanted to spend. And it's very often that designers get a little full of themselves and create these beautiful pipe dreams that have nothing to do with your budget. I don't like wasting my time. I don't like disappointing people. So in the questionnaire, I have a lot of information about budget, because if it's clear that I cannot do what you want which means that I'm clear that no competent company can bid for the prices you're looking for. You need to know that in the first hour before you spend, like my last client, $12,000 before price really comes into it and they have to start, pulling that design to pieces. Now, what I did with that client was I came in and in 5 hours, so less than $1,000, we redesigned from scratch, and that design got built. It got built several months early, and it got built for exactly what the agreed price was. And there didn't need to be any revisions during the job. So what the questionnaire does, and grounding to your budget, to your needs, to your value does, is it gets us to this point where you don't have to do and pay for design revisions, as well as change orders and things during the project. So that's really big. And believe me, if you're writing the $30,000 checks for mistakes and change orders, it starts to get really big to you as well. Right now, it's just an abstract idea. But I start by meeting with you, and paid consultation begins when I review the questionnaire with you and anyone in your family who's got an emotional stake in the project. It's far more efficient if everyone who's attached to the outcome is there in that first meeting. And the reason I do it in person with you rather than some people email me the questionnaire ahead of time, I don't read it. I do it in person. The reason is I like to watch body language and group dynamics if it's a couple or a family. And there's always follow-up questions. What do you mean by formal? Everyone has a different version of that word. So could you show me a few photos of formal? What do you mean by no bright colors? Do you have any images on your iPad or whatever that show me what you want? And so I unpack the questionnaire and flush it out. And my job at this stage is to get inside your mind. Because there is no objective right landscape for you unless you're building the house to sell for the average market. Like some clients will tell me, I want to make as much money as possible when I sell this home, and that's all that I care about. I don't need to talk to them any further at that point because I know the market. But if it's for you, then your values, your taste, the way you will be using the property is really important to understand. And my goal is to do the project that if you had 27 years of expertise and a competent designing mind, that you would do for yourself. I don't want to impose my style on you. So now we're up to the first hour of going over the questionnaire. And some designers will take off after this initial hour meeting, and they'll hire a surveyor to spend maybe $3,000 or $4,000 doing a topographical map of the site. And then they'll come up and sketch, and they'll give you a couple $1,000 design bill to lay out their ideas. And then you'll tell them, oh, I don't like this part and I don't like that part, and could we change this? And then they'll go home and spend another $500 to a few thousand making the changes, and then go over that. And then you'll go out and get bids, and most of the time those bids will come in surprisingly higher than you would like, and so it goes. Well, what I've found is it's far more integrated, cost-effective and efficient to go out with some spray chalk on the ground and paint out paths and describe ideas to you. Because first of all, it's very difficult when you're removed from the site to have a spatial sense of scale, of light, of large masses that may be just outside of the plot plan. So I like designing in the space because every single thing my body notices and feels in that space, whether you're aware of it or not, that's going to be affecting you. If light is too bright in my eye as I'm standing in a place I'm suggesting is a patio, then when you're sitting there, that light is going to be too bright in your eye. And if I don't grasp that in the space, I may not put a tree that would provide some screening and shade there because it's not obvious just on the drawing. So the other thing is that 95% of my clients, once we go through this walkthrough using chalk, using sketches, looking at photos, asking my clients to stand here and look out here. Sometimes we'll get a chair and say, look at what the view is going to be from here. 95% of my clients get it from that visceral walkthrough, from looking at images. Not only do they get it more realistically than they would just looking at a very fancy blueprint. And because of that, what I find is there are fewer mistakes if we go through that process rather than the blueprint process. Because blueprints can look very nice, but when a client sits in the area drawn in the blueprint, they notice, oh, I didn't like this. I didn't realize it would be like this. Now, the really big reason that I do this with, and don't get into the blueprints with most clients is that it may take me 10 minutes to describe an idea with you there, looking at a photo, painting something out. It may take an hour of measuring and triangulation to just draw that patio. In other words, it's 6 times more expensive to draw certain things than it is to get out an iPad and show a photo. Look at this line here. You see this wall in this photo? That's what we're talking about. Do you like this wall in this photo? How do you like the stone color? How do you like this? Okay, let's look at this one. Do you like this one? Okay, so imagine that here. And then when I do my contract, I can drag that photo into the contract and say 2-foot wall looking like this photo, 120 square feet of flagstone looking like this photo, a pathway of gravel looking like this photo, and it's not too technical for you. You're following along visually, remembering spatially, and it's saving you money in fancy blueprints. Now, the other reason I don't like wasting time with surveyors and fancy blueprints is I don't use them. As an installer, my job is to create the most attractive landscape that feels good to the typical body in that space. I have a good sense of that. If I want to move a path a foot to the left or a foot to the right, I do that spontaneously while I'm building it. Now, I'll include the client. I think we should do this to this. But most of these things do not affect the cost at all. And it's one of the benefits of having a designer intimately involved in installation. So I come out and check what's going on regularly so that it can be improved. Some things are just, you don't get a clear sense of how they should be done until you're building it, and then you discover a surprise or an opportunity, and it's always very clear when you're building it. So we do an entire site walkthrough Now, why do I do that? Because about a third of my clients just call me for a little project. They say, I want to redo the back porch, or, tear out this wall and tear out this patio, etc. And occasionally, that's just fine. But most of the time when I get to the site, I ask a few questions about the future, about longer-term plans, and I discover there's a number of things about that little area that have strong bearing on what will be done in the future or on how things flow in the rest of the garden. There are also problems that I notice that many people are oblivious to, and they don't know they're oblivious to until I point them out. And finally, the biggest reason that I get called out, after maybe 20 years of compartmentalized projects where a homeowner did this, and then they did this, and then they did this, is when you design and install projects piecemeal. When you're completely done at some point, you have a hodgepodge. It just doesn't look right and feel right and flow right. And so they realize we've spent 20 years making a hodgepodge. It doesn't look the way that this other landscape looks functionally and aesthetically. We've just created a jumble of isolated stuff that has nothing to do with itself. And then they call me out and they say, can I make this look nicer? And a lot of what I have to do is begin by taking stuff out, which means that that client paid someone to put it in, then pays me to take it out, and then pays me to put something in again that's much better. Well, they're paying 3 times. Design is so cheap compared to paying 3 times for anything. Meaning 90% of my designs are less than $2,000. If you build the wrong garden shed and have to tear it out and redo it, you cost more than that. So, it's very expensive to make mistakes at all levels, not to mention the fact that you have to live with a mistake for 10, 20 years because you didn't know it could have been done far better and sometimes cheaper. So I like to have a long-term relationship that looks at the overview and results in a competent and educated client. Because there's no reason you should be competent and educated if you're relatively new to landscaping. It's not your job. But if you're making decisions from a place of ignorance and incompetence, those decisions are costing you money, real estate value, waste, unnecessary time, and you don't know it. Because the problem with being uneducated and incompetent in a particular area is that if you are uneducated and incompetent, you don't know that you're uneducated and incompetent. Only a trained professional would know that, but you haven't consulted one to look at that area. And so you're blind, but you don't know that you're blind. And that's the thing that really gets me as a designer. It's the reason that I won't do projects that I'm not involved with the design. There are a small minority of designers out there that really check and dot the I's and cross the T's to make sure that it's the best idea for that site. And by best idea, I don't mean getting into Sunset Magazine or InDesign. I mean the best fit for your budget, for your goals, for your values, for how you'll use the site. That's the most skillful and valuable part of the entire process. And because I would say it's at least half of the time that I do design, I present an opportunity, an idea that that client had no idea was possible. But more importantly, they had no idea that they had no idea that it was possible. They thought they understood all the options. And they just don't have 27 years of seeing possibilities. Now, those options that I see, whether it takes 10 minutes to explain or 5 seconds or whatever, they cost thousands of dollars. They save thousands of dollars. They change the feel of the site. And it's my biggest personal, I guess, frustration with the industry is that I realize that a tremendous amount of the work that is done anywhere in the world that's done without competent design, the installer is happy with it, the client is happy with it. It gets the permit, whatever, it's built. But the client is only happy with it because they had no idea that something much better and sometimes cheaper. I mean, that's the gold zone of a good designer, is to come up with something better than what was going to be done already, more functional, longer lasting, and cheaper and more ecological. I mean, and then adds real estate value. If you can come up with that, and that's my kind of number one kind of analytical filter as I look around the project, so some designers are all excited about, the new, the new variety of tree that just came out at Monrovia. I'm not interested in that because most of my clients are not interested in that. It's great, it's nice. What really excited me recently was when I went out to a job site and a builder had called me out. And the builder was getting ready to pour a $50,000 retaining wall. And it was fine. It would be a standard building practice to retain soil in that way. But within 30 minutes, I saw that they were taking up large chunks of broken concrete from the driveway. And I explained to the client that we could save dump fees on that concrete, and that I could build their $50,000 retaining wall for $12,000. And it would have less drainage problems because it would be a permeable wall. And they wouldn't see either of the walls because they were the wall was on top of a large slope. So it would be an invisible wall with a $38,000 savings that was better for the environment. Hold on. Now, this was the most exciting thing about the entire project to me personally, because with $175 of consultation, I had saved the client $38,000 and mitigated some of the water problems, because if you'd poured a concrete wall and then ran a drainage pipe downhill to the neighbor, it would have concentrated all the water into one area, which would increase the negative impact of that water on the neighbor rather than diffusing it over the whole site the way that occurs when you stack broken concrete. So that's what a good design is. It's not a 5 or 6 pansies in a beautiful shape by the front door. That's not going to affect you as much as saving $38,000 and coming up with a more ecological and better drained wall built faster that doesn't need a permit. And it brings in another big piece. Bureaucracy is a tax on all creativity and all construction. There has never been a time in 27 years where the participation of government has added any value to my clients in my projects. There have been numerous instances where they have made the design worse and increased costs and slowed things down, where it's hard to see who was the winner here. Meaning, if you have an incompetent designer, then a regulating authority, if your designer is sociopathic and doesn't care about the neighbors, doesn't care about you, doesn't care about the environment, then a regulator will improve that. But if you have a very competent designer and standardized protocols, usually the regulating authority will interfere with a better idea that doesn't happen to meet the technicalities of the code, or they'll just slow it down, as Tiburon can slow a project down by 6 weeks to repair a fence. It's incompetent, and that incompetence is innate to monopoly. So one of the things that I'm keen to do is design in a way that bypasses the need for as many permits as possible. Because if you need a permit, in many cases you need an engineer. The engineer has an incentive to overbuild the project, and they have no incentive to save you money because they're getting a flat fee, and their reputation suffers even if 1 in 1,000. If 1 in 1,000 projects, there would be some little problem if that wasn't overbuilt. They're happy to build all 1,000 projects in a way that adds 30% to the budget when the repair is little or nothing. I don't like that approach. I think a good designer should be sensitive to your money. I'm kind of thinking through every bit of the way, the design process, the installation process, with the goal of being the company that I would want to hire if I was competent, well-informed, and had lots of choices available to me. And everyone has things they can do with saved money. And so I don't believe in waste. So we begin with an overview to make sure that we're not missing something big, even if the project at hand is, rebuilding a driveway, essentially the same size driveway, essentially the same shape. It's been working perfectly. That's fine. We just want to make sure that that's not dovetailing into something that may be planned for the future. That if we make this little change here, it saves you money down the road. So when we do this overall walkthrough, I give you problems, I give you possibilities, I show you pictures, and I like to have the real-time feedback, because I don't want to spend your money to develop ideas you're not interested in. My job is to make sure that you're an educated client. Once you know the pros and cons of different ideas and costs, make whatever decision you want, because you're now informed. But my job is to make sure that you're not doing something because you had no idea something else could be done, or you had no idea what it cost relative to other options. And having looked at the site as a possibility field, these seem like intelligent ideas for what you've told me is important to you. And here's what those ideas cost. Now, the reason I bring in costs at this stage, which almost no designer will do, is one, I know the costs because I'm going to be bidding them, and I don't see other companies able to undercut those prices. And so I'm pretty confident in the prices. But the other thing is it's such an important part of decision making. You may love the idea if it costs $500. You may hate the idea if it costs $50,000. It's a nice benefit, but at what price. And so I like to leave clients at the end of the first meeting with rough costs. Now, because I'm just scribbling them down, right on the spot and not calculating every yard and checking the latest material prices, these prices are within 10, maybe 15% at most accuracy. So it's enough accuracy for you to make a decision. Now, if you save 10% or it's 10% more, that's not going to be a deciding factor for one idea. And I aim, so here's another little insight. I've learned that clients, as soon as I say a number, it doesn't matter if I say it's just a vague number, as soon as I say a number, a client attaches to that number. And they get upset when the number, the actual price, is higher than that number. So, I make a deliberate choice to try and be on the high side with those initial quotes, because I'd love to surprise the client with it being lower. And usually I'm able to keep the overall budget to those initial costs if we've spelled everything out in that meeting. And the way that works is, some of my ballparks are going to be high, some of them are low, and so I'm usually able, when I do the detailed free bid for my work, I discover I underbid that, I overbid this, but they average out. So usually I'm able to actually hit the total number quoted if we add up all of my ideas at the end of the first design meeting. Now, I've learned that it takes time to ramp up a meeting. Hellos, getting situated, finding the drink, getting a pen, all that kind of thing. And then getting in focus, remembering where we were at. In other words, you get 50% more value to have one long meeting rather than, 3-hour meetings. So usually what I'll do is, after going through the whole site with you, going over ideas, getting feedback, I'll write up every idea and all of the costs. And then we'll look at how those costs exceed or fit your budget. Most of the time, the full range of possibilities are more than a client wants to spend. So then our job is to delete the things that are less important to you and still have a comprehensive picture that isn't going to feel disjointed or like a hodgepodge when it's done. And that, is a high value, radical improvement of what's there. And then the last stage, which a good third of my clients need, is to break it into stages. Now, this is where my experience as an installer comes in, because there's a way to break something into stages that adds to its overall expense. And there's a way to break things into stages that if you did this and then that and then this, it's a really efficient pattern of installation. And my job is to help the client understand that. They're always free to reorganize things if their priorities differ from the efficiency. But I'm then able to tell the client, if you do it in this sequence, you can save 15% of the total cost. If you do it in the sequence that you'd like, you'll just pay 15% more. Now you're informed, you make the decision. And so all of this takes place in 4 to 5 hours, 90% of the time. And every step of those 4 to 5 hours of, is leading to 80% of all the important decisions being made, and is as efficient a process, as practical a process as I've seen anywhere. And that's why we do it that way. Now, what I don't focus on in that initial meeting is detailed plant selection. So I might look at a bed and I say, you know, based on what you've told me and some images, why don't we do that perennial garden theme you like over here? So we'll have cutting garden, perennial garden over here. Sound good? Okay, done. 1 minute. Now it may take 2 or 3 hours to go through hundreds of different perennials and pick out this one and arrange that, but that can be done later. It's enough for your brain to visualize that there's going to be a 4-foot wall here, a change in shape, and a perennial garden there. The time that I like to do that detailed plant selection is when the hardscape is built. Any changes we're going to make, any plants we remove, any demolition we do, anything we're going to build, we do all that first. We prepare the soil. Then we have another design meeting. So it makes it a little less overwhelming. You know, you don't have to come up with everything. It also gives me the chance to get to know the garden more. And so, and then the last confirmation that you're getting exactly what you want is when we've picked out the plants to be used based on photos, or sometimes going to the nursery together. I deliver all the plants on site and I set them out personally, and then we do a walkthrough. This is how the plants actually look now that we've bought the plants. What do you think? Because they will look exactly that way when they're planted a foot lower. And so if you want a few more plants, or you want to break up a line, or you just pick up the pots with me and we move them. It's so much more efficient than doing another drawing revision. It takes less seconds to pick up a plant and put it down over here than it does to erase a P and then look up what is a P and try and visualize a little circle. So that's why I do it that way, is, again, saving time, more reliability, saving money. And I just have never met, actually I've met one client, one client in 27 years where she liked the plants at the nursery and liked them above. And then a week after I'd planted them, all the plants, she didn't like them. But I don't think she would have liked them if they were drawn either. And so, you know, you can't win it all. And that is a good thing for you to know as a client. There is no perfect landscaper. Everyone has their strengths. And what my goal is in this is to give you a sense of mine, which are kind of process and communication oriented and strategic and cost effective, and integrating lots of complex systems. That's something that in the way that I do it is not available anywhere else. But that's not necessarily what you're looking for. Some people want a good conversationalist and person to chat about Latin names of plants with, and I'm sure there are other good choices in that category. But the final thing I'll say is I wrote these books. I mean, no local book makes any money. That's if you're a publisher. But the reason I wrote these books was I always enjoy an educated client. An educated client appreciates what I do more than someone who hasn't seen how expensive and problematic the general way of doing things often is. That's one element. Two, you don't have to pay me as much. If you're an educated client, you don't have to ask 80% of the questions that are already answered in a book. So that's why I wrote the first book. But there's no pictures in the first book. It's just a guide to 80% of my technical knowledge in very easy to read, practical terms. The reason I created the second book was basically to be a picture book. And it's organized by theme. So for example, this is one of the pages of fences. Now, I don't have an opinion in many cases on all these different styles. Each of them were taken in Marin, and so obviously they're part of the Marin design landscape. My goal with this book was that before you settle on a fence design, you have some good ideas of what else has been done in Marin. And if you're trying to describe something, that you can just point at a photograph and say, I like this color of the fence and I like this pattern of the fence. I know exactly what I'm bidding. Again, you don't have to pay for fancy drawings. A photograph is more valuable than a blueprint of a fence, because we both know that if your fence looks exactly like that, I've hit the target. And so this is 600 images of local landscape themes, with just a few, articles on design thrown in. And then finally, some of my clients are very busy, and finding an hour to go down and pick bark and pick pebbles and pick different selections at the material vendors is it slows down the project. We're waiting for the client to have the chance to come down and look at what's available. When you've got hundreds of products to choose from, having samples of all of them is a bit much. And so I created this little chapter on some of the main materials that are available locally, so that a client could at a glance in 10 seconds say, I like that one, I like that one, I like that one, I like that one, and that saves them the time. So from start to last, and even at the end here, I put in like 10 very different projects I've done, just to show range. And then I talked about how much each of them cost. Now, the book is now 5 years old, and there's about 4% inflation in construction in Marin, minimum. Some things jump up like that. The water district changes the code, and suddenly it's an extra $15,000 for a water meter and things like that. But overall, you've got 4% construction inflation, which is much better than it's. If you've got money in savings or a CD, you'd be making much more avoiding that construction inflation and doing a project all at once, rather than doing a project 5 years down the road when it's 25% more expensive. But in this area of the book, I talk about costs, because it's one of the biggest questions I get. How much does this cost? What will it cost? Well, you can look at these photos, and both of these books are available on Amazon. If we do design together, and one of the reasons I charge for design, because I make my money installing. That's my income. But I want a client to be free to install the garden themselves, use my ideas, get as many bids as they want, and feel free to pick whoever they're comfortable with. And by keeping those two completely separate, so you pay a fair price for all the ideas and design, you do whatever you want with them. That's up to you. And then I'll give you a very competitive price, and it'll be a flat cost price. And I do one job full attention to complete. 90% of my jobs are done early, not late. 90% of the construction industry, their work is done late. So I wanted to kind of set a precedent. In order to get things done early, it's too complex to juggle jobs. So full attention, one job until complete. And my goal is to discuss things thoroughly enough in advance that if you want, your price does not change 1 penny from start to finish. Now, maybe 20% of my clients come out in the middle of the project and say, I've changed my mind. Let's add some light fixtures over here, or, let's do this, let's do that. That's fine. That's additional work for an additional fee, but it's not necessary. And I like that. So you now know more about process in my business, and, then, you're an expert. And that's why I wrote the books, so that we could collaborate on an equal footing, that you understand why and how things are done and what to expect if we work together.